found some music, but an announcer broke in with a new bulletin. A murderer had escaped from the state prison. He was armed with a knife and was headed south on foot. His left hand was missing. In its place, he wore a hook. "Let's roll up the windows and lock the doors," said Sarah. "That's a good idea," said Donald. "That prison isn't too far away," said Sarah. "Maybe we really should go home." "But it's only 10 o'clock, said Donald. "I don't care what was there. The footsteps stopped. Then she thought, oh my god, Sarah's in her bedroom. She ran upstairs to Sarah's room. Only Sarah was there and she was asleep. Liz looked in the other rooms, but found no one. She went back down to the dining room, scared out of her wits. Soon she heard footsteps again. Then they were coming down the stairs into the living room. Now they went into the kitchen. Then the door between the kitchen and the dining room slowly began to open. Get out! Liz screamed. The door slowly closed. The footsteps moved out of the kitchen, through the living room, toward the front door. The door opened and shut. Liz ran to the window to see who it was. No one was in sight, nor were there any footprints in the fresh snow that had been falling. Creepy. Alright. The dead hand. The village huddled on the edge of the vast swamp. As far as one could see, there was soggy meadows, holes filled with black water, and glistening sheets of wet, spongy peat. Skeletons of giant trees, snags, the people called them, rose up out of the muck, their dead branches reaching out like long, twisted arms. During the day, the men in the village cut the peat and hauled it down to dry and sell for fuel. But when the sun went down, and the wind, sighing and moaning, came in from the sea, the men were quick to leave. Strange creatures took over the swamp at night. Some even came into the village. That's what everyone said. People were so afraid they would go out alone after dark. They would not go out alone after dark. Young Tom Pattison was the only person in the village who did not believe in these creatures. On his way home from work, he'd whisper to his friends, "There's one." And he would jump and run, and Tom would laugh and laugh. Finally, some of his friends turned on him. "If you know so much," they said, "go back into the swamp some night and see what comes of it." "I'll do it," said Tom. "I work out there every day. Not once have I ever seen anything to frighten me. Why should it be different at night? Tomorrow night I'll get my lantern and walk out of the low snag. If I get scared, run. I'll never make it out again. I'll never make fun of you again." The next day the men went to Tom Pattison's house to see him on his way. Thick clouds covered the moon. It was the blackest of nights. When they arrived, Tom's mother was pleading with him not to go. "I'll be all right," he said. "There's nothing to be afraid of. Don't be foolish like the rest." He took the lantern, singing to himself, headed down the spongy path toward the willow snag. Some of these young men wondered if Tom wasn't right. Maybe they weren't afraid of things that did not exist. A few decided to follow him and see them for themselves, but they stayed far behind in case he ran into trouble. They were sure they saw dark shapes moving about, but Tom's lantern kept bobbing up and down, and Tom's songs kept floating back to them. Nothing happened. Finally, they caught sight of the willow snag. There was Tom sitting in a circle of light, looking this way and that. All of a sudden, in a circle of light, looking this way and that. All of a sudden, the wind blew out of his lantern, and Tom stopped singing. The men stood stock still in the blackness, waiting for something awful to happen. The clouds shifted and the moon came out. There was Tom again. Only now he had his back pushed up against the willow snag, and he had his arms out in front of him, as if he were fighting something off. From where the men stood, it looked like dark steps. Dark shapes were swirling in around him. Then the clouds covered the moon again. Once more, it was black as pitch. When the moon came out again, Tom was hanging on to the willow snag with one arm. His other arm was stretched out in front of him, as if something was pulling it. It looked like a man, as if a rotting, moldy hand with no arm, a dead hand, had grabbed Tom's hand. me this cold and lonely night? Nobody, she sneered. Be by yourself, you're miserable. She stood up to go to the house, and now the voice was right behind her, and it was whispering, who's going to stay with me this cold and lonely night? Who? Before she could answer back, a big hairy hand came around the corner and grabbed her, and the voice hollered, you are. I hope you guys enjoyed these scary stories. Again, I know sometimes I can take things to heart. These are just stories, they are not real. But I hope you have a great rest of your night. I hope your weekend is full of blessings and you enjoy it. And if you don't work on the weekends, relax. You deserve it. And if you